Hey folks, welcome back to Learn from Dad. I'm James. We're out in the garage tonight. It's time to change the oil in my truck. The oil life meter inside of the dash says it's time. That's what I go by for my vehicles. So follow along with me as we change the engine oil and give you a little how-to lesson. So for reference, my truck is a Ram 2500. It's got the 6.7 liter Cummins turbo diesel engine in it. So the supplies that you're going to need to take care of this job, we'll work across them. First, you're going to need a wrench or a ratchet of some type. When you get underneath the vehicle and you have to take the drain plug out, typically it's going to be a hex head plug, or in my case, it's actually, I appreciate what Ram did here, it's actually a 3/8 drive shank on a ratchet. So I can just take my ratchet, stick it right in. You're always going to want to have some paper towels. You need to make sure you get your hands clean. You're probably going to might need either an oil filter removal tool, so oil filter wrench, or this happens to be an oil filter cap that you can put onto your 3/4 or 3/8 inch drive socket to remove your filter, which you're going to need a brand new one of. Now, kind of an odd thing, Sharpie laying here. If you have seen any good mechanic, you'll know that every time they change oil, they're going to write the mileage, if there's mileage on the engine, such as in a vehicle, or the engine hours, or in my case, I'm going to write both of them. You're going to need yourself a funnel, fresh oil. In my case, I need 12 quarts. I do like to use, personally, full synthetic oil. This is the oil weight and grade that is recommended by my operator's manual. That's the best thing you can do, is check your operator's manual. And then lastly, we're going to need some kind of a container to drain the engine oil into. So I've had this drain pan for years. One little pro tip, before you climb under that vehicle, open the vent. If you start dumping a bunch of oil in there with no venting, that's going to burp up and kind of blow oil all over. It's kind of a mess. So pro tip. So another small pro tip is to have the engine oil at least slightly warm so that it will run out of the engine easier. In my case, I drove home with my truck and it was at 180, 190 degree engine coolant. This is an easy way. Jump into my dash and see how much has the truck cooled down, and am I going to burn myself on that oil. It'll give you a directional indicator. This is still fairly warm, but I'm going to change it anyways because I want to get it done. Another good idea, take your wristwatch off and other things you don't want covered in oil, just in case you get out of hand when you're underneath that vehicle. All right, so I got my ratchet. I already slid my drain pan underneath. Let's slide underneath the truck and I'll show you how do you identify where the drain pan plug is on the engine so that you're not draining the wrong oil from the wrong place. Now, one last pro tip, sweep your garage floor before you go underneath the truck. Forgot to do that, so it might be a little bumpy on my creeper. So you typically want to come from behind the front wheels, and actually right here, that big black piece that's sticking down, I'll see if I can reach up there, that's my engine oil pan. And you can kind of tell, if you look up, there's always going to be what's called the sump. So there's some oil up there, but majority of the oil is back here in the sump, which creates that drain point. So there's my drain plug, and you can see that's where I'm going to use my 3/8 ratchet. Now, I do want to slide up to the front and show you one more piece and kind of a different perspective of the engine. So coming in up at the front of the truck's a little harder because you've got these air dams that are typically in the way. So I'm going to duck you down underneath. And here's the front of the engine. And you can actually see right up here is the oil pan. And if we kind of tip back, way back there is where the sump is. So that's where when I came in the back, it was much easier to get to. Now, what I wanted to point out here was this little thing right here. It's actually just a piece of plastic with this little opening in it. And the reason I want to show that is, as part of changing the engine oil, is changing the engine oil filter, which this is the left front wheel. And you can see that silver can in there. That's the engine oil filter. And not exactly the easiest thing to get to. You reach in through the right front wheel fender, and some of that oil is going to drain, and so when it drains, it's going to hit that little pan and come out that little opening. So when we remove the oil filter, we'll make sure we have our drain pan beneath it. Okay, so we've got our drain container down underneath of the engine oil sump, and the drain plug. I've got my vent open on my oil pan, on my catch pan. So let's take the plug out. Now we're going to try to get it just cracked open and loosened up, and I'm going to try not to get most of this hot oil on my hand. Once I get it loose, I do have some paper towels back here that I brought with me. I try to get it to where I can feel that it's just about ready to fall out, and then if I pull my hand out of the way quick and try not to drop that plug down into the drain pan. Oh man, a tough time getting this last little bit out. Now my hands are oily. This is the first time there we go, changed the oil on this particular truck. Threads are a little snug. So that's why you stay a nice arm's length away. That oil came rushing out of there so quick, and how it ended up hitting my drain pan, it created that wave that went over, and turns out the GoPro is a little bit oil proof as well. So we're going to let this drain out, make sure it gets fully dripped. If this oil wasn't so hot, it wouldn't have poured out of there quite so quick, but hey, it is what it is. It's part of doing the job. I didn't say it was always easy or clean, but it's part of getting the job done. So in my shop, I always keep some of these oil dry or pig mats, as you might call them generically, help to soak that stuff right up. So these oil pans will drip for a long time, but get the majority out of it, call it good. So before I go up and mess with the filter, I always put the engine oil drain pan plug back in. I think it's a good idea. That way you don't go to start refilling the engine oil and accidentally forget that the plug is out and drain a whole bunch of expensive oil down on the ground. Now, you don't have to pull too tight on the oil drain pan plug. You're just trying to get it snug. There are usually seals on them that keep it from dripping, so you don't have to get overly aggressive. Okay, so we're back over by the right front wheel. We got to get up inside of there and get a hold of that oil filter and take it off now that we got the oil drained out and the drain plug back in. I did move my oil catch container up underneath of that little port, so after we pull this filter, some of that oil is going to drain down and we'll catch it in our drain pan. So we got our oil filter way up in there, again, that gray canister. I did already slip my wrench on my oil filter wrench because it's a lot easier with two hands in this particular situation. So let's just start to spin it off. This one fortunately didn't get put on too tight. A lot of times they get put on too tight and without a little bit of lubricant or oil on the O-ring or the seal at the top, and makes it really challenging to get off. So get that out of the way. See how much of a mess we can avoid making. Okay. So there you have it. Now getting this out of here, same on my other truck. I remember it being kind of a challenge. A little bit spilled, but we'll clean that up. Go ahead and set your oil filter down in your drain pan and get it nice and drained out, so that way you can get that disposed of without a bunch of oil inside of it. So now that it's time to put the new filter on, it's important to come in and grab my mileage and my total hours. So I'm going to put 14,049 miles and 365 hours on my new filter. So I always write it in two places. That way, as you're spinning the filter on, if you accidentally wipe some off or it gets covered in dirt, or you rotate it back to a side where you can't see the one here, you can see that one. Now before we spin this filter back on, it's important this gasket here gets a little bit of lubrication. An easy way, just take a little bit of used oil, rub it around. Doesn't have to be anything special. You just don't want that gasket to seize up onto that mounting flange of the filter head and cause yourself all kinds of trouble. Okay, so we got to take our new filter and put it in the same way we took the other one out. Kind of push it in backwards. Going to turn it up. And we're kind of feeling blind up in here to figure out where that is. Get my hand on the bottom and just spin it. There we go. Try not to wipe all of our markings off in the process. Okay, so I got it on there good and hand tight. Now I got pretty big, strong hands. A lot of people will go and throw a wrench on and give it a little more turn, but honestly, I usually don't. I got my wrench on backwards because if if you get that thing on there too tight, you go to take it off the next time, you're going to have a heck of a time. There's nothing worse than trying to get that stuck filter in that awful place off. So you're better off to not over tighten it. Make sure you got a little lubrication on the gasket. Okay, so let's go to the top of the engine here. I got my funnel. Here's my oil filler cap. I didn't mention it, but we'll get into later. This is my engine oil dipstick where I'm going to check and see the level of my oil. So get your cap taken off. Drop your funnel in. Now, I've already got my 3 gallons of oil opened up and just got them sitting on the bench. Now, the age-old question, which way do you hold your jug? It's actually ideal to hold it upside down because then you don't get any burping from the jug itself. So let's get all 3 of these poured in. 12 quarts. So next we're going to grab our rag, get that funnel out of there, get our oil filler cap put back in before we forget about it. Okay, now next what we need to do is make sure we got enough oil in the engine, checking with our engine oil dipstick. Now before we do that, it's best to start the engine, let it run for 30 seconds to a minute. That gets oil pushed through the engine, through the oil filter, and gets that filled up, which is currently empty. And then you're going to want to turn your vehicle off and let it sit for, I don't know, a handful of minutes, call it 5 minutes. And that lets all that oil that's up in the engine drain back down to the engine, because that engine oil dipstick is dipping down into the pan, into that sump. So you need all that oil to drain back down to get a proper reading on your engine oil. All right, just started up the truck, let it run for about a minute, shut it off. Now I'm letting that oil drain back down. In the meantime, let's go in here and reset our engine oil life indicator. So in my particular truck, you just go there, you hold OK to reset, a couple seconds, and bam, it's back up. Now, as long as you're in here, you should check some of your other vehicle info. Like the next thing we're going to have to do is change the fuel filter. It's at the end of its life as well. Okay, let's go ahead and check the engine oil. So first, I typically take the dipstick out because there's been stuff draining and splashing. I wipe that dipstick off one time and then stick it back in. So this might be a little difficult on camera, but there's an area in here that's referencing safe. So about where the end of my thumb is. So let's stick our dipstick back down in, give it a tiny wiggle, pull it back out and check it. So we're about halfway up the safe area. So I'd technically need to put a little more oil in this. I actually only bought 12 quarts because that's what the manual said. It came in 4-quart, 1-gallon jugs. So I'll have to swing back by the auto parts store. I probably need another, I don't know, maybe half quart in there. Now that oil is going to expand a little bit as it gets hot. So if I checked it when it was warm, probably look a little different. So, but either way, we're in the safe range, and I'll get a little bit more in there just to top it off, but always make sure you double check. And there might still be some oil draining down in that engine too. So let's wrap up and deal with our old engine oil. So I use these 2.5-gallon jugs. These are from hydraulic oil that I get from some of my bigger farm equipment. I'm going to take that top off. Be a little bit that spills out. This first one's already got probably a couple gallons of oil in it. So there you have it, folks. That's how you change engine oil in a vehicle, or similarly, if we were doing it in my lawnmower, process would be virtually the same. So a couple things. One, I typically don't make this big of a mess. I can already hear some of my mechanic friends coming and laughing at me about that. I had to go wash my hands before I pushed my hair out of my face. Is what it is. Make sure you recycle your used engine oil properly. So many times the auto parts stores will take that, or if they don't take it, they'll tell you who will take it. So I'll take these jugs into my local store and drop it off, dump it out for them. And also, I'm not advocating that you do this, but now you know how it's done and you understand the process. So the next time you go in to maybe pay to get your oil changed, make sure you tell those guys thanks. It's not the cleanest job, it's not the most rewarding, but they're doing it to keep your vehicle safe and running well. So tell them thanks. Come back for the next one, drop a comment down below, and we'll see you here. Thanks.